Okay. All right. All right. Thank you again, and welcome to September WHA monthly talk. We have Malvika Chatterjee, who's going to talk about a very important topic, which usually is not even in the awareness of most of the people. It needs to be brought into normal conversation, and hopefully, this is the beginning of a series of conversations that we can have for the community to start understanding this topic better. We all focus on physical ailments, physical injuries, but when it comes to mind and emotional issues and illnesses, I think the level of awareness is dismal. And therefore, when there is no awareness, people are not able to access resources that are around them. So I hope this is going to be a series of talks that we can have on this platform. Before we get on with the talk itself, I'll just take a couple minutes to introduce the platform. Wholistic Health Alliance is a 501(c)(3) nationally launched nonprofit. Our tagline says building healthy communities, and that's exactly what we focus on. We are very, very grassroots. I'm an Ayurvedic physician, and this was my sort of passion. So this was founded in 2015, and we are here with during COVID, we did lose some practitioners in the sense that they shut down and had to start some other livelihood. But 2023 is our pickup year, and we are trying to engage more and more holistic practitioners. Please do consider checking us out and joining the platform. Here is a quick look into what we offer for the holistic practitioners. There's a directory. I feature someone every month. We used to have health fairs pre-COVID, which we are hoping to start next year onward. We have a youth brigade. We work with youth, Teen Mental Health Initiative, and Fooditude, which are working on, again, teen mental health and food related awareness in youth. So if you have a youth, do consider having them join as well. We give volunteer hours. We are an approved nonprofit for Presidential Service Volunteer Service Award, PVSA. So yeah, so with that very short introduction, over to you, Malvika. Please say a few words about yourself, your background, and we are all waiting to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Katura. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Malvika Chatterjee. I always, whenever I say that, it's like my name is Bond, James Bond. That's kind of a thing. I don't know why I do this, but I always say Malvika and then say Malvika Chatterjee. Okay, so I am a geriatric psychotherapist, which is that I work with older adults. I'm extremely passionate about them. And I'm also a trauma-informed psychotherapist. I am a clinician at McLean Hospital, which is situated in Belmont. And other than that, I have a very small private practice. I cater to clients not only in the US, but also to clients from other parts of the country and the world, primarily India, where I'm based out. I am from India. So that's what is a little about me. I did majority of my education in India and then came here as my family moved, I moved, and hence have a wonderful network of people here. And it's a pleasure to see all of you. Actually, that is one thing that I had a request. If possible, and this is absolutely no pressure, if you can turn your cameras on, that would be really helpful because it's really hard to speak to people with just their names appearing. Thank you, Sharmila. Thank you. Thank you, Ritu. Thanks, Dan. All right. So I will be talking about a very, very sensitive topic today. Thanks, Carol. I will be talking about a sensitive topic today. But before that, I really wanted to thank Dr. Pratibha and Wholistic Health Alliance for giving me this opportunity. So let's kind of begin. There are a few things that I'd like to say that firstly, uh, since this is a kind of a sensitive topic, there might be a lot of thoughts, a lot of emotions that you might be experiencing. So a little bit of disclaimer on that. This is of this, I have no conflict of interest. This is for no commercial support, or this is not a sponsored program. I will also ask, like I said, if possible, to keep your cameras on, just because, it's better to see facial expressions. I work better when I see expressions. And, that's the only request I have. We will keep the question and answers to the last because, some of you may have questions, and I really, really appreciate having questions, but we'll keep that at the last of our session. And I have also disabled the chat option again for the exact same reason. Write down your questions, please. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Shobna. Write down your questions, please, and then we can address those questions later on. And I will be pausing and taking questions. So whenever you have them, just write them down, and then as the session progresses, we'll take it on from there. All right, how's everybody feeling today? What is your understanding when I say trauma? What comes to mind? Feel free to unmute, feel free to just talk. We'll see how this goes.
Hurt.
Oh, yeah.
Anxious.
Tell me a little more, Sharmila. What do you mean by anxious? Do you recognize that somewhere within you? I like that word, and I like the word hurt.
It's since a trauma that has already been experienced, and the anticipation of the trauma either repeating itself or triggers that you see that had led to the trauma, it makes me anxious.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Pain, which
Yeah.
we may or may not realize while going through it, but maybe later as you reflect on it.
Yeah. So do you feel the pain internally, or when you say pain and hurt, do you feel that on your body or externally?
No, not externally, I think.
Okay. Wonderful.
Grief.
Yeah. Yes. A lot of grief. Again, grief is a chapter by itself. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of sadness when we talk about grief, and grieving is a process. Yes, and it is definitely a big part of trauma. All right. So having all these words, and let's keep these words: hurt, pain, grief, sadness, anxious. We'll keep all these words aside because all these words are going to be coming up as we talk. Okay, what we'll do next is we'll hear some stories. And by, when I say that, stories that I want to talk about are not of military officers, not of firefighters, not of first responders. Because when we talk of trauma, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh my goodness, post-traumatic stress disorder. So maybe I'm not in the military, I'm not in the police force, or I'm not a photojournalist. So why am I experiencing this hurt and pain and anxiousness? Why am I going through this? Because predominantly that is what was told to us, that if you have PTSD or if you're going through trauma, you must have been a veteran. You must have been in the military services for you to go through this. So let's do some stories here. What I'd like you to do is just close your eyes and listen to my story as I'm talking of Abigail, okay? I would invite you to close your eyes, sit in the most comfortable position, and try and imagine Abigail. Abigail, she's 34 years old. She's average built. Now go back to Abigail's growing up. This little girl running around, very chirpy, very joyful. Abigail grew up in a very religious community. Her parents were extremely strict, very, very, very conservative. She had to go to church every Sunday and comes from a very religious background. Now, mind you, here's this little girl. She had no option to cry. If ever she cried, she was told, oh, come on, don't cry. If she ever got angry, she was told, girls are never supposed to be angry. So no exposure to emotions. The only thing her parents wanted is for her to grow up, to earn, to have a lovely family, and that's all they wanted. Now, Abigail was growing up wonderfully. She grew up to be this beautiful, young, nice, chirpy lady who wanted to be a teacher. She became a teacher. She loved her job. Imagine Abigail running around the school corridors, with supportive children. She very soon found a boyfriend who was her ally, her support, and she felt very secure in this relationship coming out of all that was happening with her parents. Slowly over the years, Abigail moves into this lovely town in Boston, in the middle of the town. And within a couple of months, her boyfriend moves into her house and started staying with her, going very well. Now, one day, Abigail was in school. She finished her hours and she was driving back home in her red Honda. And boom, she meets with this terrible car accident. This accident was so severe that she nearly died. She was rushed to the hospital. She had multiple injuries. She was very scared. She was very anxious. She was very hurt. However, these symptoms kept coming back, but it took about a month and she started recovering. Her pain and her hurt started reducing. Her physical hurt started reducing. She started recovering. But there was this support, there was this constant support of her boyfriend, her friends, the community. And within a month, she was back home. But she feared driving. She did not want to get back to driving. But here's what happened. With constant support, with constant medication, she was able to get back to her regular life. The fear remained, but what also remained was support and help of people around her, her physical health coming back, her mental health coming back. That's the story of Abigail. I'd invite you to now open your eyes. What did you think of that story? What was going on in your mind?
She was lucky because she had a good support system and she survived.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Diane. That was so important to have that support system of her boyfriend, of the community, of the hospital, you name it. And our imaginations can go into different levels and we can get the support system. But the thing is that she recovered. Did the fear go away? No, the fear was still there, but she recovered And even though she feared going back to driving, she was able to do it with the support. Now, I will invite you to close your eyes again and listen to the story of Sid. Sid is again a 34-year-old male. He's large built, goes back to Sid's younger days as a child. Small, chirpy, young lad running around, grows up in a very, very religious community. Parents are ultra conservative and very strict. Absolutely no exposure to emotions. All they wanted him to grow up to be an engineer, go to America, and live his life there, earn in dollars, and that's what they emphasize constantly, constantly. Well, fast forward to the present. He's grown up to be an engineer. He moved to the USA, and he started working in a tech company. Life was going fine. You know, Sid did have a lot of problems in terms of getting accustomed to the new country, the culture here, and so many other small difficulties that he was coping with. But he was still going to work, doing his job, earning in dollars, making up new friends. You know, things where life was going fine. One day, he was driving back home in his red Honda, and boom, he meets with this terrible road accident. He nearly died. He was rushed to the hospital. He was there for a month. But somehow, Sid lacked support. His health kept deteriorating. He kept having flashbacks of that incident. He kept thinking of that terrible road accident. But he started thinking more and more and more about that terrible fatal accident. Started getting nightmares. Every night he slept, he would recall the accident. He started having physical sensations. Or somehow his physical hurt was okay. In a month, he was sent back home. He was fine. Also, he had this option to work from home. So he was working from home. But every time he saw the TV and a small sound of, let's say, a car would remind him of that day. A smell from one of the perfumes would go back to the smell of the perfume that his father wore. He kept reminding himself of what he was wearing that day. How did the road accident happen? Could he have done something better? Could he have saved himself? But things kept going back, from bad to worse. He did not have any social support. His friends stopped calling him because he wasn't calling them. The support was there only for some time. Unfortunately, he started drinking because that was the only way he could cope with the hurt and the pain and the anxiety. He started being alone. He went for his doctor's checkup, and the doctor was surprised that his leg was not healing, to then find out that he was not taking his medication. One after the other, things started falling from bad to worse. He managed work, he lost his job, he joined another job, and he's still trying to cope with things around him. That's the story of Sid. Can I invite you to open your eyes now? What do you think? Now, you might ask me, what's the difference, right? What do you think is the difference between Sid and Abigail? Why is it?
Or the support system.
Yes, the support system. I would also say that the coping mechanism, you know. Anything else that stands out for you in the two stories?
he had to still work from home, so he didn't even have the opportunity to get out and to start to re-engage.
Yeah, absolutely. The options that he had were so little. His coping mechanisms were different. So that's the story about, that is what the difference is. Now, if you see in Abigail, even though she had the fear, things were constantly there, she kind of went back and was able to get back to life without any impairment. Whereas with Sid, that was not possible. He kept having flashbacks, he kept having thoughts, he kept having intrusive memories or flashbacks, and that was the difference between Abigail and Sid. Mona, I do see you raised your hand.
Yes, I have a question. In addition to everything that's been mentioned, is it also possible? I hope I heard the story right. He's from a different country, right?
That is also one of the
Right.
big.
So I'm asking. He's also a man. I'm just going through some of the other differences, and I'm wondering if you feel that it's sometimes harder for men to reach out simply because there's a societal pressure to feel that they don't need help. So sometimes men who are struggling, they don't get help because it's considered unmanly. And then on the other hand, in terms of different culture, is it possible that he wasn't even sure where to start? It's undoubtedly, it just seems like a very contrast of stories because of course, if you have friends and family and an infrastructure nearby, that's great. That's the best case scenario. And then if you're kind of lonely or you don't have any sort of access, but most of us kind of fall in the middle. We might have some friends, we might, but I'm just wondering, it feels like within that story is baked into the idea that we should make it. So I guess my question is, when he left the hospital, was there a social worker that said, hey, what's your support system? You're leaving this hospital, but it's going to take months and months of recovery. Was there any, and I know this is just a story, but I guess my point is, but do you see what I mean, it feels like there should be.
I totally get you. And the story is, again, just a story to kind of differentiate. There was no specific reason for putting a gender there. It was just two stories. But I completely hear you, Mona. Especially, women are more susceptible to PTSD than men. Again, it could be probably the reason that he's come from another country, that does not have resources, does not know who to get in touch with, and so many others. You're right. I completely second you on that. All right. So I just want to move on and say, if you look at the diagnostic and statistics manual of, the almost the Bible that we follow, it says that any PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder is basically experiencing a traumatic event or a series of events. It is almost witnessing a person or, in the event where you are physically, emotionally, psychologically threatened or almost to death. There is this huge impact that is on you. It could not, sometimes the trauma could happen directly to you. Sometimes it could also happen to somebody very, very close to you. That is also a part of what the DSM is trying to tell us. Any questions so far before I move to my other slides? All right. So just, Pratibha, did you have a question?
No, I was just wondering if anybody needed to understand the difference between trauma and PTSD a little more, because today we are trying to understand trauma itself. What is trauma? So anybody needs to know more about trauma itself, please do raise your hand and unmute and say something.
Okay.
Are we coming to PTSD right now?
Let's sum it up there. That all of us experience trauma in some shape or form. Everybody. If you look at our lives, you're all experiencing some of the other trauma in our lives. But not all trauma gets to become post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, PTSD is a diagnosis. When we do that, when we're talking of PTSD, we are saying the complete impairment that comes into our daily lives. If you look at Sid's story, he's losing his job. He's not able to find proper support system. Even the support system that he has, he's not able to hold on to them. There is intrusive memories, there are intrusive thoughts that are there. So there is trauma, and then there is the impairment from trauma to PTSD. Not everybody gets PTSD if they're having trauma. Does that kind of sum it up?
Can I, Malavika, this is Shantu. Can I just, what Pratibha was saying, I was wondering, there is obviously a dictionary meaning of the word trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But from the scientific community,
Mm-hmm.
could you tell us a little bit more, what is trauma? Is it like a certain event that raises to a level of something? I don't know. I mean, is there like a way to better define the word trauma?
Sure. So if I have to say what is a traumatic event, I would say traumatic events are those that cause or threaten physical, emotional, and psychologically. Okay. Now, I might experience a trauma and you might experience the same trauma, but my way of reacting to it will be completely different from how you react to it. So the same trauma the same incident will appear different for two people. Now you might ask, why is that? Now there are different reasons for that. Sometimes we are genetically predisposed. It's the biological factors. It's like how Mona was telling, the lack of support system. So many factors get into what a trauma can then rise to a PTSD. Now, generally, when we are talking of traumatic events, we are talking of rape, we are talking of child abuse, we are talking of battering, we are talking of, the so-called big things. But when we are dealing in our day-to-day life, there is no big or small. Anything that impacts me and which is impairing my day-to-day life can be a traumatic event. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So for the sake of this presentation, we're not getting into the incidents. What we're trying to do is more talk about the interpersonal impairment that occurs. Now, if you look at this slide, each of us have something called a rational mind. We also have something called as the emotional mind, and the combination of these two is called the wise mind. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say I, I get a phone call from a friend of mine, and I get a phone call from a hospital saying this friend of mine has met with an accident and she's in the hospital. Now, if I'm working out of my rational mind, what I will do is I will quickly say, "Arey, I have to get to this hospital, so I'll have my keys, I'll have my Google Maps, I'll have my wallet, I'll have the map set up and all those things." So I'll start thinking very, very, very rationally. If I'm working out of my emotional mind, the probability is that I will immediately start crying. I will start feeling the hurt. I will say, "Oh my goodness, what is happening? How can this happen to my friend? Why is this happening to me?" So you see the difference between the emotional and the rational mind. Now, ideally, the combination of these two would be the best, right? We would say, "Arey, you know what? Yes, my friend is in the hospital. I'm feeling this hurt, and let me get to these things." But what happens when we've undergone trauma, or if we have PTSD, our emotional mind takes over. It's very, very hard for the rational mind to understand things or kind of have that dominated. Have you ever, I don't know if people have ever experienced that logically you understand something, but emotionally you're not able to take action? Any life experiences, does people have anybody experienced that?
I mean, death can be a good example because logically you know that people do pass away when they age, but doesn't matter how old a parent has been or a sibling or another relative. Logical mind knows that this is normal, this is natural. but it's the emotional mind does not process often as logically as the logical mind.
Absolutely. You know, even in this incident, you might ask me that, okay, in an incident like this, maybe I should just have my rational mind functioning. Why should I even bother about my emotional mind? Because I need to get to the hospital. I need to do these things. So you will say, let the rational mind work. But what is happening to our emotions? Our emotions are not taken care. But when we go through PTSD, you will most of the time find that our emotion mind is constantly active. It does not let the rational mind do its work. But what happens when we have our constant emotion mind functioning? These are the responses. We either fight a situation, we flee a situation, we freeze, or we fawn. Now, fight is, let's say, let's go back to our day-to-day examples, okay? Let's say I have an altercation with my husband, okay? My immediate response, because I have my emotional mind constantly working, my first response will be to fight. They will say, no, but you always do this. It's kind of generalizing, having distortions in thinking and constantly saying, I want to have my word last, so I'll keep fighting. Or the same situation, I will flee from that scenario. I don't want to get into any altercations. I don't want to have a conversation. I do not want to be assertive. So I'm going to flee from that because my mind is constantly terrified. If I've gone through trauma or if I have PTSD, then I'm constantly in so scared that I don't want to even face the fear. The same example, I might just freeze. I might not have words to talk. Or I might agree to everything. If my husband says this, I say yes. If he says that, I say yes. And you might find this when there is a power dynamic. So that is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Now, when all this is happening, there is also responses of how we feel, how we react to our physical environment. How do we feel emotionally? How do we feel, how we relate to one another? Now, first taking the category of physical sensations, there's a lot of nervous energy. We might feel muscle tension. There might be GI stomach upset or GI infections or GI problems. Always, you might, I won't say always, but there is this rapid heart rate, palpitation, dizziness, a lot of fatigue, the constant fatigue. There's a lot of teeth grinding that may happen. Headaches are common, backaches are common, difficulty in breathing, shortness of breath. These are things that, again, if you look at Sid's story, there is an impairment that is happening. So these are what is physically seen in a person. After which, or simultaneously, you might have psychological reactions. There's always this person who is in self-doubt, who does not believe the world. There is a hyper awareness around him. He's constantly aware of what's happening around him. Sometimes these disorders or PTSD can lead to other disorders. Depression is one of them. So thinking about what this heightened awareness is, sometimes it's decreased awareness, totally numb to the world, have no idea what is happening around them. These people have difficulty concentrating. Sometimes they also have gaps in their memories. They may remember a year and then totally forget a couple months and then come back to remembering something else. And like in Sid's case, sometimes there are images, flashbacks, nightmares of that traumatic incident constantly playing in their mind. So you see how frightened this person is constantly. Now, so there are physical changes that's happening. There are psychological reactions that is there. And then you might also see that this person is emotionally drained all the time. Fear is a big, big, big component. There's a lot of sadness, sadness because this person is losing out on time. This person is losing out on relationships. There's a lot of guilt and shame. When people go through trauma, somehow they feel responsible for that incident. It's almost I should have done this, I could have done this. Maybe if I did something else, things would have looked different. So there's a lot of guilt and shame. And also, because of the fear and sadness, this person can constantly be irritated or angered. Small things will irk the person. It's very hard. You remember that I was saying that there is this emotional mind that is constantly working and is constantly active. So all the emotions are heightened. It's like, think about a faulty alarm in a house. It's constantly ringing. So there could be loss of trust, loss of self-esteem, constantly feeling helpless. And somehow they feel they are victims of many, many things happening around in the world. So when all this is happening, this definitely shows up as behaviors. They are constantly thinking about what do we do. They have fights, they are isolated, a lot of avoidance behavior is shown. A lot of helplessness is also seen in these people. Now, all this is happening, the question is, do we have any hope at all? And the answer is yes. So it's like, how do you rectify that faulty alarm in the house? How do you go back and say, yes, is there real danger? Or is it something that I'm thinking is dangerous? People can go back to their normal lives. But the thing is, then you have to go back to basics. And the basics are to take control of your life, as basic as firstly, understanding what safety is. Understanding that safety means not just physically being safe, but also being safe mentally, financially safe, occupationally safe, socially safe. These are safety factors, and you have to recognize how important it is for a person who's gone through trauma or is suffering from PTSD to have safety as the most important factor. Now, people say, what is there in diet? It's important to have a balanced diet because our minds, our brains are a part of our bodies. They are no different. The chemical imbalances that happens, the rise in the cortisol, the rise in the adrenaline that is constantly there has to be balanced. So thinking about how do we go back to eating healthy? Can we keep ourselves away from substances if possible? Because whenever we have substances, whatever those substances are, there is an altering of mood, there is an alteration of behavior. Those behaviors then become, triggers for something else. And it's like this compounding effect that happens. So once we think of safety, think of balanced diet, think of hydration, think of physical activity. Even though for people with trauma, along with trauma, there could be PTSD, there could be depression, there could be other personality disorders. Thinking about introducing physical activities at least for some time in the week. Because again, that is important to take care of your physical health along with your mental health. And I cannot emphasize more on the rest and relaxation bit. Having a proper sleep regime is so important. So thinking about winding down at a particular time in the night, creating an atmosphere for sleep, creating something that's an ambient atmosphere. Some people think about this. When we were growing up, how we changed ourselves into night clothes, brushed our teeth. Some people had their showers at night, so getting ready in that manner to go back to your sleep, putting your electronics away, getting something to read that is just relaxing. Sometimes using ambient noises like rain or um, some sleep inducing music can be really, really helpful. And then talking of social contacts and support. We are social animals, we need the support. So creating those social support where we have lesser and lesser judgments for ourselves, able to share things. Now, it could be by just starting off with a therapist, starting to talk about the trauma and building these connects so that you justify each of these. Now, let me tell you, when we go through trauma, it is impossible to heal in silos. It's not possible. We need social connects. The safety, diet, and physical activities is something that we can possibly do on ourselves. But then the healing process requires help, requires support. And that's why we say, and that's why we emphasize on the social contacts and social support. So going back to basics and wanting to thank you, but I'm leaving some time for questions, thoughts, comments, suggestions. We have about 10 minutes. I'm going to stop the share here so that I can see you. It's really hard to focus and, yeah. Do you relate to any of these? And I'm not saying that, you must have had PTSD. I don't know your individual situations. Pratibha, did you have a question?
No, just a couple comments and just thoughts. Yeah. So there was a time when PTSD was not even a condition that was recognized.
Yeah.
Now, my my immediate thoughts right now are being in a caregiving field myself. I have seen a lot of people with different levels of trauma. My question is something to just mull about a little bit, is that trauma is not something, in my observation, that is a linear thing.
Mm-mm.
Trauma can happen in small doses. It may not reach the level of PTSD, but it does impact your physiology, your psychology, your physical well-being. For example, if a child, first of all, the two stories you said, you built up a little bit of their childhood, which I felt I did not find a connection later on. Like there was a strict, very strict childhood for Sid, and for Abigail, it was more religious and strict. That way you can't cry and all that stuff. What happened to that? Because these things don't go away easily, because
Oh.
they are like pains that are there in your psyche. Similarly, if a child is repeatedly told they're not good enough, and they're not intelligent enough, they're not achieving enough. What about those traumas? That's my I feel that's a little more significant than having a diagnosable PTSD, which is okay. Now you have a term for it. There are some parameters on which you can diagnose. But what happens to those micro doses of trauma?
Oh
I
my
feel those need to be recognized very importantly also, because in my experience, I have seen a lot of physical ailments coming from those micro doses of trauma. We don't have a word for that probably today, but I feel that's extremely important for all the background that you gave for both of the cases, uh, example cases. I feel there's a lot that would have influenced their
Absolutely.
everything, their responses. Yeah. So those are my immediate thoughts.
No, yeah, I completely agree with you that these micro dosage of trauma, if you may, it starts from a very, very young age. Now, the trauma could be intentional, it could be very, very unintentional also. It could be, a social impact. It is a cultural impact. The place that I come from, it's emotions kind of don't take precedence over anything. You have never been taught. There's a lot of, okay, focus on this. You're not good enough. You have to do this. So these definitely impact. Now, if you see, many of them go through the same microdosing. Not all become PTSD, but do they affect day-to-day lives? Absolutely affect day-to-day lives. Will they show up physically? Absolutely show up physically. They may not get to the level of PTSD, which is why it is so important to speak about trauma, to understand. I've had such an upbringing in both the cases, whether you're talking Abigail and or Sid, in one of the case, she had the support, she was able to do things, and she was probably able to speak about it. We don't know the nitty-gritties what happened in Abigail's life. We don't even know what are the nitty-gritties that happened in Sid's life. But does these micro traumatic events affect? Absolutely affect in the long run.
Yeah, I think that is something we probably, that is the part
Yes.
that I think we can discuss more and more, because and again, it may not start at a young age, maybe a like in an abused marriage, when a woman
Yeah.
starts to get abused by her husband, or either ways, the male gets abused by the female. But that is another case scenario where, again, microdosing of you're not good enough, you're not measuring up, or, financially dependent spouse. So, trauma can actually get initiated at any age, I
At
feel.
any age. And
Yeah.
I want to introduce the word gaslighting here, and many of you have heard the word gaslighting, where you start doubting your own capabilities.
Yes.
You start doubting, am I doing this right? Maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I'm just using a gender here. Maybe they are correct here. And maybe I'm wrong. So when this constantly keeps happening, it is going to impair your day-to-day activities, because then this has a ripple effect on other areas of your life. You start thinking, wait a minute, my boss is telling me this, so maybe I'm wrong. You start having trust issues.
Right.
And when all this is happening psychologically, it will show up physiologically. It will show up in your bodies. And many a times these people go to doctors and find out, get hundreds of tests done, batteries of tests done to find out nothing is wrong physiologically. So it's a question that we have to keep asking ourselves, what is happening? And I do see Sanchari's hand.
Yeah, hi. I also want to add this, that it just doesn't affect you. It gets expressed in the genes and it goes forward.
Forward.
So it, my son has anxiety and he has no reason for being anxious at the age that he is in. And sometimes he behaves exactly how I behaved as an adult. So, and at times I wonder, where does this coming from? And then I went back and did some research and said the expression, maybe you don't pass the anxiety or the anxiousness or the stress, even on that 9 months period, not a single day I had any kind of anxiety and stress. I had a very nice pregnancy all 9 months, but still. So that was my question. Where is it getting from? Because I had enjoyed my 9 months, but maybe deep down it is coming from my mother from my grandmother. That's called the expression of genes that has got passed on to him. So this is so in a way it's kind of it's very surprising, and it's very it's very interesting to see how it gets passed on generation to generation without even we realizing it.
Yeah, Sanchari, thank you for bringing that up. There is something called as the intergenerational trauma.
Yes.
Don't even
Yes.
recognize it. It must have been that our parents have passed it on to us.
Yes.
There is almost a alteration of at the gene level.
Yes.
This kind of a predisposure to either trauma or such diagnosis, and it's a very confusing relationship with trauma, if you may, because like you said, the 9 months of your pregnancy was absolutely wonderful, everything went well, and then suddenly to see something appear in your child can be very confusing, and that's again where shame and guilt starts coming up to say, did I do something wrong? Was I wrong in some shape or form that now my child has gotten it?
Yes.
And so over a period of time, the shame kind of keep reinforcing itself to say that I was wrong, and I was wrong.
Yes. Absolutely.
Thanks, Sanchari.
Thanks. It was a very interesting session. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments or suggestions before we kind of wind up for the day?
No one else is saying. I do want to say that I feel people will be much more benefited if the medical fraternity starts to recognize trauma as trauma, not in categories, whether they qualify to be a PTSD or not. Just to acknowledge trauma, I think that can go a long way in creating, a space where patients get heard, because often the effort or the response of the medical experts is to try and get a name, a category, and if they don't fit in any of them, then it kind of gets a little bit dismissed. It's not recognized. Whereas I feel that chronic level of even low trauma can be very lethal. That's my observation in my own practice.
No, I completely agree with that. I also want to put a plug for something called as the trauma-informed care plan. Now, this is something that if you have gone through trauma, you can fill that up in your charts so that the doctor or the medical provider is aware of it. See, we want to work with the client so that the best care is given. And oftentimes we are human beings. We just don't know what is going on. The doctors might not know. But having that trauma-informed care presented in advance gives a lot of information to the medical provider. That way they know what to do when you enter the office. So, should you need a technique to ground you? Should they ask you before touching you? Should they, ask you certain questions, and so on and so forth. So I just want to put a plug for something called as the trauma-informed care plan.
Right. But again, the point is people don't even know they're in trauma. It's the job of the care provider to recognize it. I don't know. I just feel so passionately about it because I feel a lot of trauma just gets missed or dismissed.
And confused.
Yeah.
I would like to say something as well.
Sure.
I agree with you, Dr. Shah. I think that a lot of it is missed. I think that it's a much needed area of profession that our doctors and our hospitals and our caregivers need, because it's very much lacked in this world today. People just get pushed aside. They either get put on medication that sometimes does or doesn't help. Most of the time, it may help temporarily, but it is never a cure-all. So they find that they're on this roller coaster ride and with no help. And it seems like a very large percentage of people that are in this situation don't have the support and don't get the long-term help that they need. And it's sad. We need more. We need more organizations and more people that are better trained and more knowledgeable than our traditional physicians in that area, because they're really not.
Yeah, people are getting educated. People are being more sensitive now. And Susan, I completely agree. You know, it is for us as a community to recognize, if in doubt, I would say, if you even have an inkling of doubt, ask. You might not be somebody who's has a high level of impairment, but even if it's coming into your day-to-day life, it's time for you to ask. And we are all a community. We are here, we're doing this platform so that people are aware, people get an understanding. So whatever that doubt is, just get it out.
I think Kiran has made a very valid point. Culturally, also, trauma is stifled. That's another point. So, all in all, I think our society is structured to kind of dismiss
Yeah, totally.
trauma of different levels. Yeah, not recognize it. Oh, just toughen up, suck it up.
And sometimes
Just
we
get
do
on with it.
Sorry. And sometimes we do it ourselves. You know, I feel sometimes we say, oh, big deal. I went through this. It's not a big deal. You know,
That's why big, because we are taught to do
we are
that as
taught
a society. That's the normation.
right.
That's how we are normed by our societal practices. It's something, we need more of this, as Susan was saying. We need to just continue to educate. And this is a self-selected group. I'm sure there are a lot of people here who are already oriented to mental health and well-being, but I'm talking about general practitioners. They often, medical practitioners don't know what to do with the information that they're getting. So there's a lot of training that needs to happen, even for the medical professionals, not just the people. Both ways. So it's like a very neglected area, I feel, and I'll give you a quick example. I know we are going over time, but today morning I was doing a follow-up with a war veteran. And he was saying, I suggested therapy to him, and he was saying that structurally everything is done in the defense system's power to discourage them from getting medical help for mental health issues. They will challenge you, they will make you fill 20 forms, and they discourage you, and then you might get a label and all that. So he said, I'm going to spend my own money, but I'm looking for a therapist on my own now. So these are the systemic barriers
Right.
for accessing care. And it's really heartbreaking to see all that.
I feel as though there's more help out there on the holistic end of different physicians. A large percentage of people get more help than they do in traditional medicine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, whatever your faith is, whatever your form of seeking help is, whether it's holistic, whether it's the conventional, seeking out is the most important thing. And yeah, I do see some thank you messages, and I want to thank everybody here for your lovely messages. And I'm open to you asking questions. My email ID is, I'm just going to type it here. So for people who have questions, please feel free to write to me.
I'm going to stop recording.
Yeah.
But before that, the website of the organization, if you would like to check out, and I do encourage you to check out, Wholistic Health Alliance, is wholistichealthalliance.org, and here holistic starts with a W, and there's a story for the W on the website. So WHOLISTIC Alliance, healthalliance.org, wholistichealthalliance.org. Thank you so much for hanging in there so late in the night. This is a topic that can go on, and we're all passionate about it. Thank you so much, Malvika, and thank you so much for everybody who attended.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan, for sharing.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Susan. Thank you,
Website.
everybody.
Thanks,
you.
Malvika. Bye.
Pratibha, will you
Thank
stay
you.
there?
Yes.
Thanks, Kiran.